Welcome to the debate. Today we are focusing on, well, a really critical choice facing high net worth retirees. How exactly to manage those huge future tax liabilities, what some call the ticking tax time bomb, that have built up in traditional tax-deferred retirement accounts as required minimum distributions, or RMDs, get closer.
Yeah, look, this financial pressure, it's definitely real. But the central question isn't if you should act, it's really how you should act. So what we're debating today is whether these proactive, pretty aggressive Roth conversion strategies, converting large chunks every year, are truly the best approach across the board for securing retirement wealth, or if maybe a more cautious, tactical, multi-year strategy, one that really focuses on avoiding those immediate income traps, offers better long-term tax efficiency.
Right. And my position is that fundamentally, proactive Roth conversions are essentially indispensable tax insurance. We really need to lock in today's relatively low federal tax rates. I'm talking the 10%, 12%, 22%, and 24% brackets. Now, these were set by the TCJA, and crucially, they're scheduled to sunset at the end of 2025. So acting now ensures tax-free growth potentially for decades. And it's vital for optimizing what gets passed to heirs under the Secure Act's 10-year distribution rule.
See, I come at it from a slightly different angle. While locking in lower rates is definitely the goal, these conversions, they have to be executed with almost surgical precision. If you overconvert in any single year, you can immediately trigger income-based surcharges and tax penalties that frankly can completely wipe out the intended long-term benefit. So this is why I argue that caution and really meticulous planning are paramount.
Well, the urgency, it really just comes from the math. For retirees who are holding traditional IRAs over, say, $1.5 million, RMDs start kicking in at age 73 or 75 starting in 2033. And those mandatory withdrawals, they can easily be $80,000, maybe $100,000 annually. That alone can push their combined income into the 24% bracket or higher, especially when you stack it onto things like pensions and Social Security. So converting now is basically treating the current tax bill as buying future tax-free growth on sale, before those RMDs force your hand at potentially higher future rates.
That's a compelling argument, especially thinking about the sales price of tax right now. But we also need to zoom out a bit and look at the legacy impact. Think about that $2 million inherited IRA under the Secure Act's 10-year rule. It could force beneficiaries who are probably still in their peak earning years, right, to take out $200,000 or even more per year in taxable distributions.
Right, a huge burden.
Exactly. And that income just stacks right on top of their working wages, potentially pushing them into the 35 or 37% brackets. So converting now, it's almost like a gift of tax freedom to the next generation.
That's actually a great point of convergence for us. That legacy benefit is, I think, one of the strongest reasons for potentially aggressive conversions.
I agree on the benefit, absolutely. However, the immediate, very tangible costs often get, underestimated because of what I tend to call tax traps. Paying the tax now only really makes sense if the future tax rate you or your heirs avoid is genuinely higher than the rate you pay today. And maybe more critically, we have to address the funding. Conversion income is ordinary income. If you use the converted funds themselves to pay the tax bill, you automatically reduce the amount that's growing tax-free in the Roth. Plus, and this is important, if the retiree is under 59.5, that portion used for the tax is seen as an early withdrawal and could trigger a 10% penalty. So the fundamental rule has got to be, pay the conversion tax only from outside non-IRA funds.
Okay, that's very sound advice regarding funding the tax bill and definitely avoiding that 10% penalty. But let's shift a bit to the strategy of how much to actually convert. My proactive approach really advocates for maximizing conversions consistently, especially in that optimal window, before RMDs start, maybe before Social Security kicks in. And this means aggressively filling up the current tax bracket you're in without spilling over into the next one.
I generally agree with the concept of filling the bracket. For a married couple filing jointly, maximizing maybe the 22% or 24% bracket before you hit that 32% threshold, that often looks like the sweet spot. However, I'm not entirely convinced by just aiming for the bracket ceiling, because that approach often ignores something we call the Social Security tax torpedo.
Yes, the tax torpedo. It's a genuine danger zone, you're right. For retirees who are already receiving Social Security, even small increments of conversion income can trigger a disproportionately large amount of their Social Security benefit to suddenly become taxable, and that drastically raises their effective marginal tax rate.
Exactly my point. So while you might think you're paying a nice predictable 24% statutory rate on that conversion amount, the actual cost, the effective rate, might be significantly higher, potentially up to 1.85 times the statutory rate, once you factor in the extra tax triggered on the Social Security income. That's a really expensive mistake to make. Conversions just cannot be reliably calculated on a simple spreadsheet. They really demand detailed tax projection software to accurately model the combined effect of the conversion income, Social Security, and those income-based surcharges like IRMAA.
Okay, let's pause and clarify IRMAA for our listeners because it is such a critical trap.
Right, IRMAA. It stands for the Medicare Income-Related Monthly Adjustment Amount. And it's particularly insidious because it uses a 2-year look-back period. So conversion income that you report on your, say, 2025 tax return, if it pushes your adjusted gross income above certain thresholds, I think it's around $246,000 for married filing jointly now, well, that income dictates your Medicare Part B and Part D premiums for 2027. Suddenly, an aggressive Roth conversion that you thought might save you $1,000 in future tax could end up costing you thousands of dollars in higher Medicare premiums starting 2 years later. And we also have to watch the NIIT, the 3.8% net investment income tax, which kicks in above $250,000 for joint filers. Precision is what keeps you safe from falling off these cliffs.
Absolutely. Precision is key for avoiding those traps in standard conversions. But the aggressive planner also needs to utilize every advanced tool available. And that brings us to strategies for high-income earners. I'm thinking specifically about the mega backdoor Roth. This is a massive contribution opportunity available to high earners who already make too much to contribute directly to a Roth IRA.
The mega backdoor Roth is certainly a powerful tool for building tax-free wealth, if the 401k plan actually allows for it.
Right, that's the key caveat. If the 401k plan permits after-tax contributions and in-plan Roth conversions or withdrawals, a high earner can contribute way beyond the normal limits. You know, the $23,500 employee contribution for 2025. By maxing out their regular pre-tax or Roth 401k contributions and maybe getting an employer match, they can then contribute the rest in after-tax dollars, right up to the total IRS limit, which could be around $70,000 for 2025. Converting that after-tax portion, ideally right away, lets that pretty substantial sum compound tax-free forever.
Okay, while I definitely acknowledge the power of the mega backdoor when it's available, it is, as you said, heavily reliant on a specific and frankly not universal 401k plan design. That makes it a bit unreliable as a foundation for a universally aggressive strategy. And furthermore, that complexity you mentioned brings us right back to the headache of the pro rata rule. This rule is, well, it's the ultimate hurdle for many high earners trying to do the traditional backdoor Roth contribution.
Ah, yes. You're referring to the rule that basically says if you contribute non-deductible money to a traditional IRA and then you try to convert it to Roth, the conversion gets taxed proportionally based on the percentage of your total pre-tax IRA assets. So if you happen to hold a large rollover IRA from an old 401k alongside that new non-deductible contribution you just made, well, that big chunk of pre-tax money acts like cream in the coffee, right? It taints the whole conversion.
That's exactly right. So if you have, say, $40,000 sitting in pre-tax IRA balances, and you try to put in $7,000 of non-deductible money for a backdoor Roth, guess what? Most of that $7,000 conversion is immediately taxable because of the $40,000 already there. It kind of defeats the purpose. The tactical move, which requires some real advanced planning, is to try and eliminate that pre-tax IRA balance entirely before doing the backdoor Roth. You do this by rolling the pre-tax IRA money into your current 401k plan, assuming, of course, the plan allows for incoming rollovers.
It's an administrative step, but it clears the deck, so to speak, for a fully non-taxable traditional backdoor Roth conversion.
I appreciate you highlighting that specific maneuver, and while I see that pro rata solution as, well, an administrative necessity for the traditional backdoor Roth, the fundamental goal, from my perspective, remains aggressive asset location and achieving that crucial diversification of tax status, having money in taxable, tax-deferred, and tax-free buckets.
And that diversification, it relies completely on proper administration, which frankly is where some aggressive planners can sometimes fall short. Moving beyond just the initial conversion strategy, we really have to address the administrative controls needed to manage these accounts properly over time. We need to stress how critical the IRS ordering rules are for Roth distributions. When you eventually take money out of a Roth IRA, it follows a very strict sequence. First come your regular contributions, then your conversions. Taxable portion first, then non-taxable portion, and only last do you touch the earnings.
Right, that sequential order and the various 5-year rules that are tied to contributions and conversions. That's what makes meticulous tracking of your basis absolutely non-negotiable, especially if you're doing multi-year conversions over time. And this requires consistently and accurately filing Form 8606 every single year you make a non-deductible contribution or perform a conversion.
And let's not just brush off Form 8606 as some simple piece of paper. For someone who's doing multiple conversions, maybe some rollovers over a decade or more, tracking that basis accurately year after year is actually a pretty arduous compliance task. We also have to constantly remember liquidity. While waiting until year end to do the conversion might be a practical tip, since your total income is clearer then, you absolutely must ensure that using a chunk of money from a non-IRA account to pay the tax doesn't jeopardize your financial flexibility or deplete your emergency fund.
This whole conversation about complexity, risk, liquidity, and long-term planning, it really underscores a gap I see constantly. Most retirees with substantial IRAs, 100K, 500K, even folks with millions, they've never really seriously explored how something like gold actually works inside a retirement account. They hear about it, they see that central banks and major financial institutions are accumulating it as a hedge, but they don't really understand the mechanics or, frankly, whether it even makes sense for their specific situation. If you're in that boat, there's actually a fantastic free resource. Augusta Precious Metals put together a really comprehensive gold IRA guide. It explains everything with absolutely no pressure whatsoever. You can download it right from the link in our description. They've been around over 10 years. They're top rated for transparency, and their whole approach is basically just to educate you. No high-pressure sales tactics.
That sounds like a good resource. What I'd appreciate about an approach like Augusta's, assuming it's truly educational, is that it takes the mystery out of it. A good guide should walk you through, the 3 simple steps often involved, how the rollover process actually works. It's often only about 15 minutes of paperwork to get started. And, most importantly, what the real costs and considerations are. Whether someone decides gold is right for them or not, at least they'll understand what many sophisticated investors and institutions seem to already know about diversification into hard assets. Yeah, check the description below for that free download if you're curious.
Okay, so getting back to the core debate on conversions, it is true the benefit is often realized decades down the line, while that tax bill, it's due today. But my position remains pretty firm. While the complexity absolutely exists, the structural advantage of tax-free growth and future flexibility, especially for those large account holders staring down RMDs and that restrictive 10-year rule for beneficiaries, I believe it far outweighs the immediate tax cost, provided the planning is executed correctly. And the current environment with the TCJA tax brackets potentially sunsetting soon, it really does present a window of opportunity that might close if future legislation brings significantly higher taxes.
And I largely agree that tax diversification is paramount. However, fundamentally, a Roth conversion is essentially prepaying taxes based on, let's face it, uncertain future tax rates and uncertain future income sources. The ultimate decision simply requires highly detailed, very individualized scenario modeling. You absolutely must weigh the potential marginal benefit of future tax savings against the immediate real cost and the very real potential exposure to things like IRMAA, the Social Security tax torpedo, and other hidden tax penalties. In short, aggressive conversions done without full foresight can accidentally turn what looks like a 24% statutory tax rate into an effective tax rate closer to 40%. It really proves that precision in this case is probably the most valuable commodity.
Ultimately, I think this debate really highlights that retirement tax planning isn't a one-time decision you make and forget. It's truly an ongoing, annual process. It demands continuous modeling and assessment of your income sources, your account balances, and of course, paying close attention to potential tax law changes down the road.
Absolutely. The key takeaway isn't to simply convert aggressively without thinking, but also not to ignore the looming RMD tax problem either. You have to constantly monitor those subtle tax cliffs, those administrative rules, to ensure that the immediate cost you're paying truly justifies the hoped-for long-term tax-free outcome. Whether you explore something like gold IRAs or stick to traditional diversification, the critical thing is understanding why smart money banks, wealth managers, even central banks are all increasingly looking toward hard asset protection in today's environment. If you are curious about that angle, grab that free Augusta guide mentioned in the description. There are no obligations, it's just education. Definitely don't wait for the next market downturn to discover your portfolio maybe wasn't as diversified as you thought it was.